Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with AR. This week's video, I'm having some fun. I just did all those city videos. I was looking at good, safe destinations for people with like pretty normal tastes. Now I get to make a video for people whose tastes are more, let's call us people with particular tastes. That's a polite way to put it. Folks who are interested in a different lifestyle. People who are interested in homesteading, people who are interested in permaculture, people who want some space, some self-sufficiency, and let's be honest, if you're doing a lot of work to set up a long-term environment, you want some security no matter what. And that's why in this special forecast, we're considering worst case as well as most likely scenario modeling to give you 7 low population locations of refuge. So let's be straight for a minute. I'm fully invested in RCP 4.5 modeling. I do think it's the most likely scenario, even with all the troubles that we're experiencing. We've all seen in the financial markets that things can change very fast. They can change overnight from greed to fear. I think we are very near that tipping point on climate and climate policy. That soon, with the troubles we're experiencing, things will be very evidently bad enough, impossible for anyone to ignore, to push the policy level change that we need to continue to get 4.5, to keep pulling back from the brink, keep pulling back from worst case scenarios. We are already making some progress there. That said, although I am committed to RCP 4.5 modeling, I do, of course, also look at worst case modeling. Who wouldn't? My place in central Iowa, it'll still be intolerable territory if you do look at worst case modeling. We'd be in like a Memphis like climate. That's a big potential transition, but this location is where my people are. I want to stick with them. I think we can make it either way. If you are interested in a tolerable, affordable, low population environment anywhere in the Northern Plains, it's great. A lot of good opportunities. We're going to be fine. This video is for people who like to fantasize about the best stability, minimal transitions. As much as I love the Northern Plains, as robust as our outlook is in both scenarios, most likely and worst case, even in a good year, it's crazy here. You have to be willing to be a crazy person to live on the Northern Plains. Let's look at some places where they're challenging, but you're going to have some year-to-year stability, right? Let's get going. Let's look at some gems. You'll see we're going to bounce just all over the country. The first place that we're going is the Olympic Peninsula. This is an area where many people were very concerned about the climate outlook, right? Because it's so beautiful, it's so special. Many of us are emotionally invested there. And let me tell you, it has been enormous refuge for humanity for hundreds of years. We have wonderful quality of life here for human beings going back hundreds of years. And we have continuing presence of indigenous populations, very strong, organized, beautiful communities. We have a sovereign territory here on the Quinault Reservation. There is a deep land tradition for care for the land in this wonderful area. If we look at the USDA heat map, oh, it's on RCP 4.5 now. Let's look. Here's contemporary, this very cool environment, right? Under most likely future, very little change. Few more days. This is days over 86 adding as we lose the deep blue. If we look up to 8.5, really no further loss on the peninsula. So the summers will stay cool enough for those old growth forests. What wonderful news, right? Looking over to the winter. So here's contemporary. We have a big range of zones here. It goes 9, 8, 7 as you get up into the mountains on the Olympic Peninsula. You can see that when we move towards 2050, under our most likely future, you have some more movement of this coastal warmth, that zone 9 area. If we fail to hit RCP 4.5, if we're looking at a worst case scenario, you do see more movement in of that zone 9. However, we're talking about ecosystem, that zone 9 ecosystem. Let's look. It was present today. It was present today. So we're seeing an expansion in physically connected territory where there's the potential for species migration. So if, even under a worst case scenario, we're looking at change here, but it's not catastrophic change. It's change where we have knowledge going back hundreds of years. The broad human community has knowledge going back many hundreds of years for how to care for and how to sustainably get resources from these areas. and from areas that will have some range change in a worst case scenario. I think that that is so exciting to see that stability on the Olympic Peninsula. Not a lot of population density now. There won't be a lot of population density. It's not a place that's appealing to many people, but for some people, for people who are drawn to it, who they really get the energy there, it's a good place. If you can find a place to dig in there, beautiful place to help support this incredible refuge of the human quality of life. The biggest challenge there is that there is some danger of fire. The challenge bigger than that is the fact that it's a tsunami zone for a lot of it. It's like, what? There's a major threat that's not related to climate change? Yes. Tsunamis are a major threat in this area, not a climate related threat. The local oral tradition warns us of big tsunamis that hit that area every 300 to 400 years. We're kind of due, fingers crossed, none of us will see a big West Coast tsunami in our lifetime. They're supposed to be crazy. When we talk about the indigenous knowledge, the oral tradition about this, the communities there have set points above the tsunami mark where they put the community centers. You know, this is a lived tradition of protection. It's not some like story people, you know? So the biggest opportunity, I think, on the Olympic Peninsula, it's a chance to help honor and preserve this beautiful place that has overall one of the lowest projected change levels in the US, and a place where hopefully we can listen and contribute to the care of the land that has allowed it in many ways to be so beautiful and strong for so long. Now we're going to move to somewhere completely different. Here we are checking out the bottom of the New Mexico, Colorado Sky Islands area. I'm not sending you further north in Colorado. That is not necessarily low pops, but you should know the Sky Islands area extends way up into Colorado. Denver, man, if you got money to buy into Denver, it's a nice situation up there. So this is a very interesting area. You'll notice again, we're in an area with a lot of strong organized indigenous communities. We've got the Navajo, the Ute, the Apache have a sovereign nation territory within this Sky Islands area that we're going to be examining today as a low pop destination. This, I think it's cool to have it on the map, to have a good representation of the types of variety of biomes that are likely to be preserved even in a worst case scenario situation. That this would be the stupidest place to go if you are not familiar with desert lifestyle, with how fragile these landscapes are. So just because you like it kind of warm, maybe you're Angelino thinking about where to go. Don't have a fantasy about going here. You need to know how to live in this area. You need to be able to listen about how to live in this area if this is a place that's interesting for you. But let's look at what the changes are going to be like. If you're looking for like towns in here to try and be outside of. You want to try and be outside of Alamosa or Taos. So looking at the heat map, we have pretty cool summers up in this high desert area right now. Looking at how that's going to change in 4.5, we can see that the Sky Islands are small under 4.5, right? Under 8.5, the shrinking continues, but there are still several excellent areas of preservation, and we want to look at how that overlaps where we're going to keep a cold winter. So here is contemporary data looking towards mid-century under 4.5, our most likely scenario. We can see some loss, some reduction of the cold. We're creeping up the mountain, right, for the cold winter. At 8.5, that continually continuous zone 5 areas, which let's go back to the heat zone at 8.5, which lines up pretty well. The zone 5 with the preserved, look at this areas particularly. So not like way up on the mountain peaks. You can't live on top of a super tall mountain, right? You're not like it's like some Dr. Evil fantasy. But you can live in these areas, in these slopes that are high enough up that you're keeping preservation. We can see that these sky islands are places where a lot of living things are going to go. And if we look back at the map, I think this is kind of awesome that the this reservation here that the Apache Nation holds. This was like a big joke. Some of this land was like it was an insult. This was like the worst land, and it's gonna be like the best. I kind of love it. It's a nice inversion situation. The challenge in this region is definitely going to be the water issues. It's a fragile landscape, like I mentioned. It is a place where there is some projected increase in winter precipitation. So capturing that, capitalizing on that increase, capitalizing on water storage is going to be very important as we deal with some summer drying trend. It's got to stay low pop, this area. This is not an area with the fragility of the soil, with the fragility of the water outlook where any moron should go there, right? But it is a place that is going to retain distinctive character, that is going to be a place where people who respect water, who respect the land, will be able to continue a traditional mode of life there, will be able to continue a sustainable mode of life there. The biggest opportunity here is not just that we're talking about this precious stable territory, we're talking about precious stable territory that has a huge margin of safety from big urban centers all around the place. Biggest margin of safety of all of the choices. It's difficult ground to traverse too. It's very protective. It's the lowest pop of the low pops with the limited water. It needs to stay low, but I think it's interesting. And I kind of love knowing that, like, even if things get bad, if things get really weird, like these two locations we just talked about, those are two different, very different American lifeways that are going to be preserved. Let's go somewhere where there's going to be some water. The next place that we're going to check out as a location of refuge is the Mississippi Headwaters. All right, so here we are in an area that is going to be able to handle a little bit more increase in population. You'll notice that it's another area with strong indigenous communities. We're looking at the Mississippi Headwaters centered on Bemidji, looking at a pretty large area around here that you'll be able to better define when we look at it on the climate maps. This is between White Earth and Red Lake, both very strong, very rich in heritage Ojibwe communities. Lot of Ojibwe population around here. Lot of knowledge in the oral tradition and in the recorded tradition about conditions that include the way that this landscape is going to shift. This we'll see, we look over on the heat zone map. Right now, it's very cool here around the Mississippi Headwaters in the summer. We can see that under the most likely climate future, we are looking at significant increase, maybe another month over 86. If we move it up to RCP 4.5, we're talking about a 6 weeks increase, additional 6 weeks over 86. Looking at the plant hardiness zones in this area, this historically has been low population because it is just so cold. It's just incredibly cold. We're talking about zone 3 winters, extremely hard winters. Looking at our most likely future, this zone 3 forest is in trouble. You can see a huge retreat of zone 3, huge retreat of zone 3 north. If we look at the worst case scenario, we can see some zone 5 moving in, but relative stability centered on Bemidji. Cold enough that this is going to be at the edge of the wildfire zone. And let's zoom out a little bit here. So there's our center. We can see that we're coming out to the edge of the forested zone. This area is going to be more vulnerable to wildfire here. We're out of like the red zone for wildfire in northern Minnesota. So this area, it is looking at a higher level of change than other regions of refuge. Part of the reason why I think it is still so particularly resilient under both most likely and worst case scenarios is the level of indigenous knowledge, the level of indigenous knowledge that encompasses a wide range of conditions in this dynamic climate in northern Minnesota. This is going to be a level of change that it'll be a challenge. It's the major challenge of the region to harness this fairly high level of change and exist in the context of a transforming landscape. You're in an area where there's excellent migration routes for every plant and animal that's going to need to get into this new territory. You're living in an area where there's a good understanding about how the ecosystems fit together so that you can support that transition. And that's a big opportunity, is being there to help care for it. I think that this is important to note. This is an easy area to move around. It's an area in the middle of a potentially very high security region. You know, there is not a level of change or a level of economic disruption here in the heart of the Midwest as serious as in other parts of the country. So I think this area, barring the threat of wildfire, has the potential not only to be resilient and low population, but resiliently peaceful. I think this can remain a very peaceful area, even in a worst case scenario. It's one of those places that's not quite good enough to be in the highest possible demand, which helps make a peaceful place. Sometimes that's the safest choice, right? Is a place that is most people's third choice. There's lower competition here. It is challenging territory. The mosquitoes are intense, and climate change will not be hurting the mosquito populations at all. If this is a place that speaks to you, this is a place that has a wonderful potential for continuity, wonderful strength, good land values, a good place to come and help, a good place to come and live sustainably and help and move into any kind of a future. We're going to move just a little bit further over. This next region, we're moving into Wisconsin. All right, this next place we're in the Wisconsin Apron. I call it the Wisconsin Apron, where we still have the cool preservation up in northern Wisconsin, centered on Rhinelander. Rhinelander is going to be your town to radiate out for in this low population area. It's worth noting here, we're not going to be able to look at it on the heat or plant hardiness zone map. There is a wet trend here, where the winter and spring, we're going to see increases in precipitation that are significant enough to change a lot of the tree-based ecosystems. You're going to need some really wet tolerant trees. You're going to want to capture the water in the spring for the dry summer season. Thinking about perennial crops, if you're a person who's interested in perennial crops and animal husbandry, this is a great place, particularly if you're interested in nut trees and have an eye towards milder but still cold winters. You'll notice that on this map, we're also near sovereign tribal territory. We're near the Menominee Reservation. So I feel like it is interesting, and it can't just be a coincidence that all these places of refuge are areas that are so close to so much sovereign territory. Let's look at how the climate is likely to change in this area. So right now, this is a place with a cool summer, very cool summer up in this edge of northern Wisconsin. This is a little bit east of your major fire danger. Looking at our most likely future, you can see a heat up going to about 45 days over 86. If we get up to 8.5, we add another 2 weeks. So we're talking this similar to over in Minnesota. This is a 6-week heat up, serious heat up. In terms of plant hardiness zones, we're starting off in zone 4. And let's keep, my bad. We start off here in zone 4, but you can see it's 3 adjacent, very cold. As we move into our most likely future, we lose the zone 4. We start to have a very true zone 5. As we move towards RCP 8.5, as we look towards a worst case scenario, centering on Rhinelander, you have a situation where you're able to stay zone 5. Zone 5 is the threshold for where you're going to see some real changes in some of the forests around here. You need to be able to maintain the true cold to reduce your invasive insect pests and your invasive fungal pests. So just like in Minnesota, you're looking at a high level of change, but you're hitting critical stability thresholds in this part of northern Wisconsin. It's a low population area where I've got you out of the highest band of fire danger. It's pretty there too. This is another very beautiful region. I think the biggest challenge that you're facing here is the potential for air quality impacts from wildfires because of the way the weather patterns tend to blow towards the east in that region. So unfortunately, if we're facing a scenario where some of the northern woods are burning, which let's hope we can avoid that. Let's hope in our hearts the smoke will come over the apron there. And that can be a problem for people who are interested in fruit and nut harvesting as well, when you're thinking about the health and output of a permaculture area. It's a lower level of change than we're projecting for the Minnesota location. It has a little bit less of a heat up. You will need to do some work though to infill the trees. You will need to work on helping tree species transition in the area and move toward varieties that need fewer chilling days. When we talk about the biggest opportunity, it's not just tree-based opportunity. This is the place with this retained cooler summer for maintaining traditional Midwestern animal agriculture. If you're interested in a homestead scale of egg production, of dairy, this is an excellent area. Better than Minnesota because of the more normative day length. It's a good climate, it's a good day length variation for successful care of many domestic animals. The opportunities here for animal husbandry are unparalleled in the larger region. In all of the Midwest, they're unparalleled to this Wisconsin apron site. Now we're going to move over to Appalachia. There are a lot of great opportunities across Appalachia. I'm going to tell you two jewels, two places that are just the tops. There are lowest change spots all along the spine, even in a worst case scenario. All right, here we go. Here's our top picks in Appalachia for overall stability. These are our most powerful islands. One of them is over in West Virginia, where you're looking just south of the border of the Monongahela National Forest. Let's center on Snowshoe. Let's take a look at the heat map. So here we can see looking towards 2050 under 4.5, like we've explored in the Appalachia video, under our most likely future, there's considerable narrowing of the cool weather territory in Appalachia. If we look towards 8.5, there's where the traditional cool summer remains. There is our thread. It's actually a lot of fairly habitable territory if you zoom in on there, but the best place is centered on Snowshoe. Similarly, if we're looking at preservation of a traditional winter, key for preservation of traditional ecosystems, looking at our most likely future, we see substantial retreat into this rich area of West Virginia of that zone 6, that cooler winter. Looking at a worst case scenario, it narrows further. This lines up very well with that island of summer cool here in West Virginia, centered on Snowshoe. This is your most resilient area right here. Right here, all the way down to Lewisburg is pretty good. You got low population area there, mostly in West Virginia, not bad over here on the other side of the state border. Before I talk more about the challenges, let's check out the other Appalachia location. All right, check it out. We're pretty far south here, talking about the diversity of ecosystems, the diversity of biomes that are going to have a shot, even in a worst case scenario. I feel like it's pretty cool that we're all the way down in North Carolina. This place is kind of hard to find. Center for your second, like, jewel-like area in Appalachia around Fontana Lake. Everyone knows that Asheville, North Carolina has like a pretty good outlook, right? If you want to look like super good and get into a lower cost of living area, get out here, centered a little bit south of Fontana Lake. Let's take a look at it here. So this is contemporary, cool summer like you'd expect. And we look at RCP 4.5, our most likely future. We can see, as in West Virginia, the retreat of the cool summer. We see that it retreats further around 8.5. This allows you to visualize your core area anywhere where you're in that mint margin. That mint margin is going to be able to hold on pretty easy. You're talking about less than a month increase in terms of hot days there. Let's look at what's going on in terms of the plant hardiness zones. We're pretty far south, so it shouldn't surprise you that even today we're looking at a margin between zone 7 and zone 6. Looking at our most likely future, we see a dramatic retreat of the zone 6 area, and that it remains just here, right around Fontana Lake. So this is where you're going to have excellent forest preservation. This is where you're going to have your best biome survival, is in this second key location in Appalachia, in either a most likely or a worst case scenario. Both of these are going to be very strong remnant biomes. It's worth noting there isn't any sovereign territory around these places like we saw in all the previous ones. A lot of Indian names, though. You know, the indigenous people here, they were forcibly moved. They died of disease in large numbers. They were murdered. There are a lot of land traditions remaining here, though. There are many indigenous people remaining here. There are strong indigenous communities. There are many people with indigenous ancestors and lived traditions here. These are refuge locations with a lower level, though, of indigenous continuity and knowledge to the ones that we've talked about previously in this video. The climate stability is good, though, and the precipitation stability is good. You know, up north, up in Minnesota, up in Wisconsin, there's going to be a lot of change in the amount of spring winter rain you're going to get. Here, Not so much. More the year-to-year variation that's already common in Appalachia. You're going to have to be prepared for increasingly extreme storms. You're going to have to store water from the spring for potential summer droughts. If you take care of that, if you're prepared for the extreme storms and you're ready to handle water on either end, no one is going to be able to pry you out of these locations. They're extremely secure. The biggest challenge is going to be that variability, the variability in precipitation and the extreme storms that come with it. Both of those threats are normal to the region. We're talking about threats that are going to grow in scale rather than emerging threats, rather than totally new threats. If you want to dig in here, you got to make sure that you look at both sides of the coin on water issues. The big opportunity here is that good relative ecosystem stability and also a relatively low threat of fire. You won't need to do much species infill here either. You won't have to do as much experimentation as you would in some other places that are facing higher levels of change, such as those water-rich sites in Minnesota and Wisconsin. All right, we've got one more. We're going to head back north. All right, for our final location, we're going to be looking at a portion of Maine and northern New Hampshire. We're going to center on Rangeley. So this is an interesting place. We're going to take a look. Let's look at the data first. Let's take a look at the heat zones. We would not expect this far north for there to be a particularly warm summer right now, and there's not. In our most likely climate future, we see a very good stability of the cool summer. If we move into a worst case scenario, still a pretty cool summer. Not bad, right? Looking over at the plant hardiness zone map, it's quite cold here, right? We're looking at a zone 4, even a zone 5 winter. This is around where we recorded the new low, like minus 108 with wind chill this winter. I mean, these are cold winters over here. Looking towards mid-century, under our most likely future, we see a preservation of that cold zone 4 winter. When we look at a worst case scenario, this is a huge change, right? This is a huge level of variability in the winter stability. Look at it again. So most likely future, we maintain a lot of the original feel. It's contemporary, so most likely. Worst case scenario, huge change. We lose the zone 5 everywhere else. We lose the true cold everywhere else around here. That's why this area sort of centering around Rangeley, we're going to have the biggest area where there's going to be potential for species migration, species infill, mild relative change. Then that high variability with different climate scenarios makes this area biggest challenge, I think. If you go here and we end up in a most likely case, it's going to be kind of like you went to Florida in the winter and all you brought was your Minneapolis winter coat. You know, if we go here and you're preparing for a worst case scenario and it doesn't happen, you're going to be prepared for a pretty different climate, a pretty different level of winter intensity than you're going to actually be dealing with. Many people who are going to these northern environments, they're going to them with a notion of winter stability. And we saw in the Minnesota and Wisconsin locations that they both have winter stability in terms of a worst case scenario. So most likely climate future, this is a place that's still pretty cold. Under worst case modeling, your growing opportunities here would open up considerably. I would put this guy as like this is the gambler's choice, this Maine, New Hampshire, northern border area. It's worth noting again, this is an area with a lack of indigenous sovereign territory due to the genocides committed against the indigenous population. So there's a lower level of deep knowledge and stewardship here, making an additional level of challenge in adapting to this level of change. But the biggest opportunities here are big. There are a lot of places with off-grid setups available for sale. The local community is pretty intensely resilient. You might find yourself with a lot of like-minded people. If you're the kind of person who this is calling to you, the lifestyle in this part of the country, there's a lot of cool characters there. There's a lot of interesting people out there who you'd be able to grow in community with. All right, folks, that's all 7. I hope this gave you a chance to see there are opportunities for low popular resilience in all kinds of ecosystems all across the country. You're maybe not interested in moving to one of these, but sometimes you get these dark thoughts. You worry like about the survival of humanity. This is, I think, kind of helpful to see that there are few pockets with highly resilient outlooks. All 7 of these places, they all need respect. None of them is like a peachy place to live in right now. Otherwise, there'd be more people in them, right? All these places need to be nurtured if they're going to take care of you. These aren't places that are going to be friendly to a modern, high consumption lifestyle. These places, they're interesting to people who want to live in a different way, right? Anyone who lives here, you're going to need to be highly resilient going in. And it's worth noting again that many of these places have strong indigenous populations and traditions. These are places where there's knowledge that's been acquired and preserved over a long period of time. The scientific community, the ecology community has come to recognize that lands maintained by indigenous people with indigenous traditions do better under a wide range of ecological measures. So if you go to an area that has this type of deep knowledge, you should be humble, you should connect with the community, you should listen. If you're thinking about a different way of life, maybe one of these places calls to you. If you want to be prepared for what's coming, no matter what, these are places where you can get ready.